Hello there, I'm Paul Belflam and this is Industrial Organization. This presentation is about a taxonomy of entry-related strategies. Our objective is twofold. First, we want to understand how the decision to invest by an incumbent depends on the strategic effect of this investment and on the type of product-market competition. Second objective, on this basis, we want to elaborate a taxonomy of entry-related strategies. We follow here section 16.1 of the textbook. Right, what is the context? You know by now what commitment means and how a firm can turn a decision into a commitment by making it irreversible. And remember also that the whole purpose of strategic commitment is to induce other firms to react and to act in a way which is desirable for the firm making the decision. Okay, so what we have in mind here are situations where a firm can act before another firm or other firms, and so is trying to make a decision now to influence the future course of action of the other firms. Okay, on that basis, you may think that for a firm to make a commitment, it has to be tough, it has to be aggressive. Okay, but as we will discuss now, this is not necessarily the case. Okay, actually, it may pay to be tough, but also it may pay to be soft. And so the first question a firm needs to answer is, when is it profitable to make a tough commitment, and when is it profitable to make a soft commitment? Okay, as we will see, this depends on the relationship between the strategies of the firms if they have to compete with one another. Okay, and here we need to remember our distinction between strategic substitutes and strategic complements. Okay, so remember that we're talking about strategic substitutes when the strategies of two firms move in opposite directions. Okay, which is synonymous to say that the reaction functions are downward sloping, and this is typically what we observe when firms compete in quantities, in the Cournot type of competition. Okay? Another way to say that we have strategic substitutes is to say that if one firm behaves in an aggressive way, well, the response or the reaction of the other firm will be soft or passive. Okay? Aggressivity calls for a soft response. Now, as we know, we've got the exact opposite when we talk of strategic complements. Here, the strategies of the two firms move in the same direction, which translates into upward sloping reaction functions. And remember, this is typically what we observe in Bertrand or price competition. Now here, if one firm takes an aggressive action, the reaction of the other firm will be aggressive as well. Okay, they move in the same direction. So you understand here that there is a clear distinction between the two types of competition, because in one case, in the case of strategic substitutes, when one firm behaves aggressively, the other firm's response is soft, but it's the opposite in the case of strategic complements. When one firm behaves aggressively, then the reaction of the other firm is aggressive as well. And you already guessed there that this will influence whether an incumbent firm, a firm that can act before some firm can enter the market, so this will influence whether these incumbent firms wants to play tough or to play soft, as a way to commit to what it's going to do in the future. Okay, so this is the key message here. The strategic relationship between firms is important because it indicates how our rivals will react, and so it determines whether a firm should make a tough or a soft commitment. Now, first of all, before we analyze all this, we need to remember that the action by the first firm, some kind of investment, as we will discuss, has two effects. One effect is direct. Okay, it impacts the profitability of the firm that makes the action, irrespective of what the other firms, the rivals, may do. Okay, so if I decide to reduce my cost, well, I will be able to produce any unit at a lower cost. Okay, that's the direct effect. Now, the effect we are really interested in here is the strategic effect. We also want to understand how the action taken by the firm, in my example, reducing the cost of production, how this action impacts the competitive responses of the rivals. Okay, so coming back to my example, I said that if I reduce my costs, this has a direct impact on each unit that I produce, okay, because I can produce at a lower cost. But there is also a strategic impact because I will change how much I produce, which will change how much the other firms are producing, okay? And this has to be taken into account as well. Right, so I've been talking about tough and soft commitments. What do I mean by that? What kind of actions can be considered as a tough commitment or as a soft commitment? Okay, well, basically, think of a tough commitment as a commitment that makes harder the life of the competitors. In other words, an action that I would take that would reduce the profitability of the actions of my competitors. Okay, so for example, if I invest in a new capacity, well, that will give me the possibility to enjoy economies of scale, for example, and produce any unit at a lower marginal, at a lower average cost. Okay, so that would be a new capacity that allows me to benefit from economies of scale. I could also reduce my cost by looking for new inventions that would allow me to have a more efficient technology and produce each unit at a lower marginal cost, for example. Okay, so this is potentially bad for my competitors because I become a tougher, a more efficient competitor. Okay, now I could also take actions that makes me a softer competitor. Okay, in the sense that it would be good for my competitors. My action would make their actions more profitable. Okay, so how could I do that? I could, for example, have contracts with my customers saying that if any of them benefits from a lower price, then this discount should be extended to all other consumers as well. Okay, so I may sign this kind of clauses with my customers. Of course, that has an impact on increasing my costs. Okay, same thing if I decide to go to a new market and for some period of time, all my costs will be increased because of that, because I would have to make investments to enter this other market. Okay, so this is quite the reverse of what we saw here, because all these actions would typically increase my costs, which is good news for my competitors. Okay, so again, we may think that these investments that make me a softer competitor are not a good idea. And for sure, from the direct effect point of view, let me go back to the previous slide. So in terms of the impact of my profitability, irrespective of what the rivals are doing, this is bad news because the direct effect is negative if I increase my cost. But if at the same time I can induce some response of the rival firms which is good for my own profit, then the strategic effect may compensate the negative direct effect. Okay, and so there may be a value in having a commitment that makes me softer. Okay, so this is what we want to understand now. Right, so we take the following setting. Think of two firms producing differentiated products, and there is a sequential game. Firm 1 is acting in the first period and can make a strategic commitment. Okay, it is irreversible, it is visible, and it is understandable by firm 2, which then enters the market in period 2, and both firms then compete either in quantities or in prices. Okay, and we consider two types of commitments made by firm 1 in period 1, either a commitment that makes firm 1 tougher, for example, a new process innovation that allows the firms to produce at a lower cost, or a commitment that makes firm 1 softer, for example, the entry to a new market that would increase production cost in the existing market. Okay, again, I repeat, we will show that even a soft commitment may be profitable for firm 1, and in reverse, a tough commitment may not be profitable for firm 1. Okay, and as I already explained, that will depend on the type of competition that takes place in period 2, whether it's in quantities, Cournot, or in prices, Bertrand. Okay, so you understand here that there are 4 potential cases that we want to discuss, 2 types of commitments and 2 types of competition on the market. So let us review these 4 cases one by one. Start with Cournot competition. So if competition takes place in period 2, the 2 firms choose quantities. Okay, and so we have described here the reaction functions of the 2 firms. Firm 2 has its quantity on the vertical axis, firm 1 has its quantity on the horizontal axis. The gray curve is the reaction function of firm 1, and the orange curve is the reaction function of firm 2. It's Cournot competition, so as we expect, the slope of the 2 reaction functions is negative. Okay, now suppose that this is one picture of what would happen in period 2, absent any investment of firm 1. Now, how can I represent the fact that firm 1 in period 1 would make a commitment that makes firm 1 tougher? Okay, think of reducing the cost of production. Well, that will move firm 1's reaction function to the right. What does that mean? The reaction function tells firm 1 how much to produce for any quantity of firm 2. Okay, quantities of firm 2 are on the vertical axis, and on this line you read on the horizontal axis the quantity that firm 1 should produce to maximize its profit given the quantity produced by firm 2. Now, if firm 1 makes a commitment that makes it tougher, if firm 1, for example, reduces its cost of production, well, what we show here is that for any quantity of firm 2, firm 1 now can produce a larger quantity. Okay, will produce a larger quantity to maximize its profit. Okay, why? Because it has a lower cost now. So it can produce for each quantity of Q2, it can produce a larger quantity at its profit maximizing optimum. Okay, so what does that mean now in terms of equilibrium in the second period? Well, firm 2 is still on its reaction function, nothing has changed for firm 2. Firm 2 is not making any commitment. Okay, so the equilibrium, which was here before any commitment by firm 1, moves to this point here, where the quantity of firm 1 is larger, the quantity of firm 2 is lower. And if we were drawing the isoprofit lines, so these combinations of Q1, Q2 that corresponds to the same level of profit, well, we could show that this new equilibrium here corresponds to a situation where firm 1 is making a larger profit. Okay? And so, what is the conclusion we make here? The commitment has a beneficial strategic effect, because it forces in a way firm 2 to move down its reaction function, and so to produce a lower quantity, thereby allowing firm 1 to produce a larger quantity. And so firm 1 would be happy to make such an investment, okay, which in the taxonomy, as we will see, is called a top dog strategy. Okay, so the investment makes you tougher, and you want to make this investment. Okay, you want to look as a top dog, right? Now, what would happen if the commitment was making firm 1 softer? Okay, well, I'm going to be a bit quicker here because you understand the mechanism by now. It's the reverse that happens. It will move firm 1's reaction function to the left, okay? Because if firm 1 has a softer commitment, it's, for example, because it increases its cost, this tells firm 2 that for any quantity that firm 2 chooses, now firm 1, when it maximizes its profit, is willing to produce a lower quantity. Okay, and so the new equilibrium will move to the left here, up the reaction function of firm 2. We have exactly the opposite as before. It's now firm 2 producing a larger quantity, firm 1 producing a lower quantity, and you can check that in terms of profits, this reduces the profit of firm 1. Okay, so firm 1 doesn't want to make such a commitment. It doesn't want to look soft when there is Cournot competition, because by looking soft, it would allow firm 2 to be more aggressive. Okay, and that would be detrimental to firm 1. So it would choose not to make such a commitment. It prefers to stay lean and hungry, as the taxonomy goes. Okay, the meaning of these different words will become clearer when we extend the analysis. Okay, just to make sure we understand this movement of reaction functions, let us take a very specific example. Take this demand function, p is equal to a minus q1 minus q2. Suppose that the cost for the incumbent is constant, the marginal cost is c1, and I'll let you check that the reaction function of the incumbent has this form, 1/2 a minus c1 minus q2. Okay, an investment that reduces the marginal cost and so makes the incumbent suffer. So suppose that the cost goes for C1 to C1 prime, with C1 prime being lower than C1. Well, plug these values into the reaction function. You observe that because the reaction is an inverse function of C1, if you get a lower C1, you get a larger Q1 prime. This corresponds to the movement to the right of the reaction function of firm 1. And you have exactly the opposite if the investment was making the incumbent softer by increasing its marginal cost. So you would have a C1 double prime that is larger than C1, and that would lead to a reaction Q1 double prime which is lower than Q1 for any Q2. This corresponds to our second case where the reaction function was moving to the left. Okay? Now, let us look at Bertrand competition. Okay, now here we have a competition in prices. Again, we put the price of firm 1 on the horizontal axis and the price of firm 2 on the vertical axis. And these are the two reaction functions, which, as we expect, have a positive slope. Okay, and we make the exact same comparison of two investments that either make firm 1 tougher or softer. Let us start with the case where the commitment makes firm 1 tougher. So keep in mind that this is a reduction in the cost of production, for example. Okay, now what happens in terms of reaction functions? Well, it moves the reaction function to the left. Why? Well, firm 1 has invested in some technology that allows firm 1 to produce at a lower cost. So it can set a lower price, we move to the left, for any price that firm 2 is going to set. Okay, so I repeat, the reaction function tells firm 1 what price to choose to maximize its profit given a price of firm 2. Well, if now firm 1 has a lower cost, at its profit maximizing level, the price it sets for a given price of P2 is lower than before. So we move to the left. Okay, and so we have also a displacement of the equilibrium that moves downwards on the reaction of firm 2 towards a situation where both firms now set lower prices. Okay, now is it a good idea to make such a commitment? Probably not, right? Because you don't want to trigger this very aggressive response from firm 2, and which would lead to an equilibrium where both firms set lower prices than before. And in particular, you can check that firm 1 would make a lower profit. Okay, so the commitment has a detrimental strategic effect. The reaction of firm 2, because we've got strategic complements now, the reaction of firm 2 is aggressive, which reduces the profitability of making such an investment. And so firm 1 would prefer not to make this commitment, and this is called the puppy dog ploy. Okay, you want to appear as a very nice competitor and not choose some kind of investment that make you look tougher. Okay, now you expect what comes next. In that case, you would prefer to make a commitment that makes you softer. Why? Because it moves your reaction function to the right. It shows the opponent that now you're willing to set higher prices for any price that the opponent is setting. And this is good because this is what you want to do. You want to induce a move towards higher prices at equilibrium and so higher profits. Okay, so in this case of strategic complements, because the reaction of the rival would be aggressive if you're aggressive, and because the reaction of the rival is soft when you're soft, well, you much prefer this second case, and this is what we call the fat cat effect. You want to have a commitment that has a beneficial strategic effect, and in this case, the commitment has to make you softer. Okay, so this is what is called the fat cat. By the way, all these names come from an original paper by Jean Tirole and Drew Fudenberg, who were the first to systematize and formalize this taxonomy of entry-related strategies. Okay, now just again to make sure, let's take an example to make sure we understand this movement of reaction curves. Go back to the hoteling model with two firms. One is located at 0, the other one is located at 1. Consumers are uniformly located on this line between 0 and 1, and the transportation cost is linear, given by this parameter tau. Think of the incumbent having a constant marginal cost of C1, and as we did before, we want to compare what happens if the investment reduces the marginal cost or increases the marginal cost. Okay, what is the effect on the reaction function? I'll let you go back to previous weeks to check that the reaction function of firm 1 has this form. It is here the price that firm 1 chooses is increasing its marginal cost, quite logically. Okay, and you also see that it's increasing in the price of the other firm. And so if the investment reduces the marginal cost, so if the new C1 prime is lower than C1, well, P1 prime will be also lower than P1 for any P2. And the reverse happens if the investment increases the marginal cost by leading to C1 double prime, which is larger than C1. In that case, that commitment making firm softer will induce it to set higher prices for any price of the other firm, which going back to the previous slide, corresponds to the case where the reaction function is moved to the right. Okay? Well, if you got that, you got most of it. Let us now try to extend a little bit this analysis. This analysis was a bit crude because we thought of the investment as being all or nothing, I invest or not. Well, in reality, you can decide to invest more or less. Okay, it's a more continuous decision. Okay, so we'll make now a marginal reasoning. And also, we assumed in the previous reasoning that the rival would come on the market no matter what. But here we want to extend the analysis by looking at potential cases where the incumbent would invest in such a way to make market entry not profitable. Okay, so we will distinguish between two cases: entry accommodation, which is what we were already looking at, but also look at entry deterrence. That would be the situation where the investment of the incumbent is such that the rivals would stay at bay, would not enter the market. Okay, so we need some little more formalization here, which I will describe, but this is not fundamental, as you will see, but I just want to walk you through the formalization. As before, as we will see, the incumbent investment decision will depend on the strategic effect of this investment, which itself depends on the product market competition. But we add, this is not written here, that the nature of this investment will also depend on the objective that the incumbent pursues, either to accommodate entry or to deter entry. Okay, so as before, we look at this two-stage game. The difference now in the first stage is that the firm chooses some investment, which we call K1, which is a continuous variable. Okay, you can decide to invest a little bit or more or even more. It's not just an all or nothing decision as what we were looking at so far. Okay, and then in the second stage, observing this level of investment, firm 2 decides whether to enter the market or not. If it enters, then there is a duopoly. If not, the incumbent remains in a monopoly position. Okay, so this case here of entry deterrence is new with respect to what we have been looking at so far. Right, so just a little bit of formalization. If the entrant decides to enter, then we have either price or quantity competition. Okay, so just to write this in a reduced form way, call sigma 1 the decision of firm 1 and sigma 2 the decision of firm 2. And we understand that sigma 1 can be either a price or a quantity. Okay, which is to say that we want to have, in a single notation, we want to represent either price competition, Bertrand, or Cournot competition, quantity competition. Okay, and so we just want to have some notation, which is the profit of each firm that depends on what is the investment level that has been made in the first period, and what are the choices of the two firms. Either both firms choose prices or both firms choose quantities. Okay, and at this second stage, they will reach a Nash equilibrium whose value depends on the level of investment that has been made in the first period. Okay, now, does the entrant enter or not? Okay, well, if it does not enter, it still makes a zero profit. We normalize the profit of not entering to zero, and the incumbent remains in a monopoly position. So we write its profit by 1m, okay, m for monopoly, which depends on its own first period choice of investment and the quantity or price it would choose in a monopoly position. Okay, now if so we want to consider two cases, either entry deterrence, so that would be the situation where firm 1 chooses a value of investment to make sure that firm 2 does not want to enter. Okay, so how do we read this inequality here? Well, given K1 and given the choices that firms would make if firm 2 was entering, well, the best firm 2 could do, the largest profit it could make, would be less than zero. So, contemplating this situation, firm 2 would prefer not to enter because it cannot make any positive profit if it enters, given the choice K1 made by firm 1 in period 1. Okay, so that would be the case where entry is deterred, is prevented. Now, choosing this level of investment could be very costly for firm 1, and so firm 1 could prefer to let firm 2 enter, and in that case, it wouldn't be trying to minimize the profit of firm 2, it would be trying to maximize its own profit, given the second stage equilibrium, sigma 1 star and sigma 2 star. Okay, so I realize that this notation may be a bit complex, but in a nutshell, what we want to say is the following. If firm 1 aims at deterring entry, then it needs to choose its level of investment to minimize the profit of firm 2 and make sure that if firm 2 enters, it doesn't make a positive profit, and therefore firm 2 prefers not to enter. Okay, whereas if entry is accommodated, so if firm 1 accepts the entry of firm 2, then the objective of firm 1 becomes different. It's not trying to minimize the profit of firm 2, it's trying to maximize its own profit given the entry of firm 2. Okay? Right, and so the question we ask now is not whether the firm invests or not, okay, as we did before, because we assumed that the investment was a 0-1 decision. Okay, here you can choose to invest more or less, and so the question is really, do you invest more or less than what you would invest if you were neglecting the strategic effect of your investment? Okay, so in a sense, we make a thought experiment in which the incumbent would be a bit, let's say, stupid, or we should say myopic, and this would mean that when the incumbent makes its decision, it doesn't take into account the effect of its decision on the behavior of the other firm. Okay, so this is the kind of benchmark we have in mind, and compared to this benchmark, we want to know if the firm is not myopic, will it invest more or less than in the benchmark? Okay, so this is the kind of comparison that we want to make. And on that basis, we reinterpret the taxonomy that we gave before, starting with entry accommodation. Basically, that was the case that we looked at. Okay, and so we will find back what we derived in the previous analysis. Namely, if we have strategic substitutes in when the firms compete, so if we have Cournot competition, well, An investment that would make the incumbent tough is something that the firm wants to make, so it will invest more than it would do if it was ignoring the strategic effect. And this is a top-dog strategy. Now, if the investment makes the firm soft, then it's the opposite. You don't want to invest too much, you want to underinvest, because this is how you would look aggressive if the investment makes you soft. This is the lean and hungry look. Okay? Now, things, as we know, change if the strategic variables are strategic complements, okay, under price competition. Here, remember, an investment that makes the firm tough will call for an aggressive reaction of the other firm. So it's not profitable to invest too much in this kind of commitment. Quite the contrary, you want to underinvest because you don't want to look aggressive. This is what is called the puppy dog ploy. But in that case, what you want to overinvest in is an investment that makes you soft. Okay? And so you follow the fat cat effect strategy. You overinvest because you want to look non-aggressive. Okay, so in a nutshell, when you have strategic substitutes, it pays to be aggressive. So any investment that makes you tough, you want to invest more than you would do if you were just focused on the direct effect of the investment. And the opposite, you want to invest less, underinvest in any commitment that makes you soft. For strategic complements, it's just the opposite. It pays to look non-aggressive. So you want to here overinvest when the investment makes you soft and underinvest when the investment makes you tough. Okay? Now, last thing we want to do is to redo the analysis for entry deterrence. Okay, so here remember the objective of the incumbent is to minimize the profit of the entrant, making sure that the entrant prefers not to enter. So here there is no point in being soft, right? You want to be aggressive. Okay, so you will have exactly the same thing independent on what kind of strategic competition you have in the second stage. And this is quite normal because you want to avoid entry of the entrant, and so you want to avoid any type of duopoly in the second stage. You want to remain a monopolist. Okay, so you want to overinvest in investments that make you tough and underinvest or avoid altogether an investment that makes you soft. Okay? Right, so this may be a little a mess in your mind right now. After watching this screencast, you can read what is in the ebook, which is trying to summarize how to combine these three dimensions. Okay? Remember, the first dimension is whether the investment makes the firm tough or soft. The second dimension has to do with the nature of the competition if entry takes place. Do we have strategic substitutes or strategic complements? And finally, the third dimension is about the objective that the incumbent is pursuing. Is the incumbent trying to deter entry, or does the incumbent prefer to accommodate entry? That makes you three variables, three dimensions, with two possibilities in each, so potentially 8 combinations. Hopefully, you can find your way through this taxonomy if you understand correctly what these investments mean and what is the impact of the competition between the firms, whether we have strategic substitutes or strategic complements. And this is all I wanted to cover with you in this a bit too long, I admit, presentation. Thank you for bearing with me.